Hi, folks. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of The Hitstreak. Check it out. I got to give a big shout out to my show sponsor, my friends over at AVLX. I also have to give a big shout out to Charles Henry and Ace Young, the amazing performers and producers of the music behind the show, as well as the amazing people that make up the Hit Lab creative team, who are the producers of the show. Folks, I have a favor to ask. If you like what you hear, and I know you do, click that subscribe button to make sure you get alerted when new episodes are dropped. Thanks for tuning in.
The real success stories told by the people who live them.
We're going to have some guests on this show that everybody knows, and we're going to have guests on this show that nobody knows yet.
One by one, Nick Hyder is adding hits to the hit streak.
Blessings, folks. Welcome back to another episode of The Hit Streak. I'm your man, Nick Hyder, and today in the Hit Lab with me, I've got a real treat for you. I have a U.S. Army veteran, I have an author of an amazing book, and I have a founder of a podcast that I have also been a guest on. In the building with me today is my man, Cameron Harman. Cameron, thanks so much for hanging with me today.
Nick, thanks for having me. I was really excited 2 years ago when we were talking about this podcast, and you were telling me that it was kind of like a project that you were getting ready, and I was excited, and we talked about this 2 years ago, and here it is.
That's right. It took a minute. It took a minute. Your podcast was actually one of the very first ones that I was ever a guest on. It was a great experience.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. You were part of a series where I was talking about inspiration, and really, I could say that is you. If I could use one word to describe you as a person, I would say inspiration. And I think that what we're going to talk about today really is that's at the base of it, is just what motivates us and what inspires us to do more. And I mean, you're the picture of it.
Well, I might have to get you to look at some other folks too. Might got to get you out more. But no, I really appreciate that. I really do. And you're dang right. We're going to get into some awesome stuff. And it is. Inspiration leads to hope. It leads to strength. It leads to a lot of great things in this lifetime, doesn't it?
Indeed. Yes, it does.
That's our first hit to the hit streak right there, baby. So, all right. So I mentioned before that talking about your podcast, right? Which is the Hermit Radio podcast.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. So what's going on with your podcast? What's happening? You've been doing it for 2 years now?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
We got started. So I started my podcast. Honestly, it was right before COVID happened, and for me, it was a time of change. And the only reason I made the podcast is because I wanted to share the change that was happening to me, which was a metamorphosis, if you will. I was going from somebody who was angry and violent to somebody who would think and have compassion and wanted to change. And so many people are like that. But what's interesting is that I'm a veteran, right? Mm-hmm. I was in Afghanistan. I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2015. And I never thought that would be me, and I didn't even realize that that's what was happening. I didn't realize that I had a problem until it was already too late. And I went to therapy, and I tried therapy, and it just wasn't right for me at the time. I needed to figure out how to fix some of the stuff wrong with me myself. Right. It was my journey. It was my thing to take on. And in this moment of discovery, it led me to religion, of all things.
Right on.
I grew up kind of not really understanding Christianity all that well, so that wasn't the place that I started. It was Buddhism.
Okay.
Because Buddhism is not a religion about a god. Mm-hmm. Buddhism is about the mind. It's about suffering. Why do we suffer? How do we deal with that? And that's the religion. Now, I'm sure that there are some experts out there who will probably tell me that there's much more to it than that. But from my very basic understanding, that's what I took from it. What is our mind? What is our thoughts? How do we deal with suffering? And that for me, that was everything. I could get behind that. I'm like, okay, well, I'm suffering. I'm in a bad place. Like, what can I do about it? And what it showed me, what Buddhism showed me, was that all of the things that were wrong in my life, they were all part of stuff that I was doing to myself.
Right.
It was my mindset, right?
Yes, sir.
When I figured that out, it was easier to kind of get a grasp on it, right? First of all, it was easier because I'm like, all right, I don't have to get behind an idea about a God yet. Like, this is just me working through some stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where I started. So I started meditating. I started practicing things like mindfulness and reading books. And it changed my life. It changed my life in such a positive way. It was almost like one day I woke up and everything was on high definition. The trees were greener. The sky was more blue. And I had more patience, which is something I didn't have before. And what I realized is, like, all in all, it was stuff I was doing to myself. And when I accepted that, when I accepted responsibility for the things going wrong in my life, it made it easier to transition. But then that opened up this big window of wanting to learn about all the other religions too.
Sure.
And what I found is that they're all saying the same thing.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Religion is pointing you in a direction, and it's not out. It's pointing you in. Everything that you need to make yourself better, to improve yourself, to have a better life, it's all in you. It's not outside of you.
Boy, that's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one. So, first of all, I say it every time I see you. Thank you for your service, man. It was all the things that you just described are, so leaders serve, right? And a lot of times they're sacrificing a lot of things, whether it be time away from family, a lot of things, including emotional stability, a lot of things. I saw a picture on Instagram the other day. It showed a soldier before he left for World War I and when he got back, and it was like only a couple years, but he aged 15, 20 years. It looked like he was a totally different person. He was a totally different person.
Yeah.
Than when he left, and change is inevitable. Growth is required, right? Growth is optional. Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. But I guess everybody that goes. So you were in Afghanistan for 2011, 2012.
Yes.
And you said you came back suffering from PTSD, right? So you came back different.
Definitely. But it honestly, it took a while. When I first came back, I was kind of numb to everything. And a lot of it is training too, like a lot of people don't want to talk about this, but having mental issues is a stigma. And back then when I was in, we didn't talk about that. And you only did if you were trying to get out of the military. Because if you said anything, it would go on your record. You might have to go see a therapist, but it just wasn't a good thing. And now again, that's another perception issue.
Sure.
Right? But my perception at the time was that it was not okay for me to talk about those things. And I had some people, I won't, drop names, but I had some people that told me that it's not a good look for you. So I sucked it up. I dealt with it and kind of just put it behind me. It wasn't till years later when I transferred to a whole new unit when things kind of started falling apart. And people had to tell me, like, dude, you need to go get help. There's something wrong with you and you have to go get something done.
But the average person probably wouldn't understand that. Like, so when I look at you, I see you're educating a lot further, but I see an educated person. I see somebody that's really smart. And to hear, like, I'm sure that there's support for you. I mean, there's the thing going around for 22 push-ups for I think is it 22 push-ups for the 22 veterans that take their lives.
Yes.
Every single day. So this is obviously, I can't imagine what you guys experience over there because I hadn't done it, and there's no way for me to reference it. And even if I tried, it wouldn't be close. It's kind of like the only thing I can reference to is until you've lost somebody or until you've brought a person into this world, you can't understand what it's like to do that, right? So this is a big issue that affects many. And when I look at the reason I'm saying all this is because when I see you and I think about your book, I feel like before you're all said and done, I feel like you're going to be a main source of recovery for a lot of your fellow service or service folk. You know what I mean? Like, I see your books and all those things. I see you being an outlet for a lot of those guys and women too, I guess.
Yeah, and I hope so. That is what I want to do. Things are changing. So the military is a different place than what I was in. So
Sure.
there are things, there are places you can go to get help, and there are things like the Wounded Warrior Project, right? There is the 22 push-up challenge. But the problem is that it's when people are getting out, right? When you're in, it's not really something that you deal with. This is a problem, dealing with things like PTSD and depression. That's something that happens when you deal with it when you get out, because you know what happens? You got a lot of free time.
Well, it's on top of the fact that you have an identity crisis too when you get out, right? So like I had one when I was doing professional sports, but I didn't have all the trauma to go along with it. And it was hard enough for me. It took me years to figure out who I was post baseball, post sports. And you guys come home and after sacrificing everything, and you're expected to just just fall into place in the real world, in the workforce and everything else. And when I was 27 and had played my last baseball game, I looked around at all the people I went to school with, and they were 5-6 years ahead of me because they were in the workforce for 5-6 years. And that was the first thing I realized is like, I'm behind. Does that happen to you guys too?
100%. And you nailed it on the head. And also I was 27 when I got out of the military, so it's a little ironic. But yeah, no, that's it. And that's exactly how I describe it for myself. I always said that I felt kind of like a used up battery. Like I had nothing left to give. I was like, who am I? So and then when I got out of the military, that's when I was doing bodybuilding. And I was doing steroids, and I was trying to be massive, right? I think even when you and I first met, I was like 220 pounds.
You were jacked.
I was huge, yeah. But, even then, right? That was switching from G.I. Joe to bodybuilder.
Sure.
Right? That didn't make me happy. What it took for me to realize I wasn't happy was tearing my right pec twice.
Wow.
Back to back. Ripping it and then having to recover, and I was just like, man, why am I doing this? Like, yeah, I'm strong, but like I keep ruining my body, and like eventually it's not going to matter. I'm going to not be able to do this anymore.
Right.
Plus all the guys that die young from steroid abuse, and I'm like, I don't want that to be me, so I quit. So I give that up, right? And that moment when I gave those things up, that is when I had the time to really figure out, well, who am I? What do I want to do? And I'll tell you that the first thing I did, really, and this is completely honest, I sat one night and I made a list of all the things that made me happy. I'm like, anything, whether it was like cartoon shows from when I was a kid, music, whatever it was, food, whatever it was. And what I did is that I started trying to add those things into my every single day. Like even if it was one thing, fine. But then I just tried to keep adding more. Yeah. And then that was like an epiphany. It was like a waking up moment. I'm like, oh, this is what I need to be doing. Right. It's that simple. Yeah. Right? You're as happy as you want to be.
Yes, sir. That's right. Well, first of all, it's hard to measure people's hearts until you truly build a relationship with them and get to know them. I met you because your wife, who is a freaking superstar, was best friends with my wife. And that was how I met you. And I knew that there's a song that Brad Paisley had years ago, and it's basically the hook of the song is talking about a stepdad. And he's like, you're what is it? You're the dad you didn't have to be. You know what I mean? Right. And both your wife and your stepson's father are awesome people. They're all great friends, and you just fit right in. Like it was like you should have been there from jump, man. It was really cool to see, and like I just understand that doesn't happen very often, and that just shows a lot about a guy's integrity, his heart, his spirit, and all those types of things. You know what I mean? So my first impression of you was really good.
Yours as well. I always enjoyed getting to hang out with you, and you could say that that's like an energy, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you think about it as energy, as in like electromagnetic energy, or just somebody's charisma. That's right. From the first time I met you, I just liked hanging out with you, being around you, and we always had interesting conversations, and so I feel like we hit it off from the beginning as well. Absolutely. You guys had, because if you put on the tux that you got married in, dude, your shoulders were like a mile wide. You know what I'm saying? Like it's crazy. But it didn't change. I know you said you were going through a lot, and man, I guess you were just great at hiding it. All I can tell you is when you look into your eyes today, it's just calm. It's just calm. But it was before, but it's just different.
It's just different. Well, I'm really, you're big, a student of paradigm mindset, and mindfulness and all those things. And we're going to talk a heck of a lot about that, right? But before we get too much into that, and as much of your experience in the Army, that's a very, especially with what we're going through right now in the world, it's and all the families that this affects. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's a very interesting, I guess, for lack of better words, thing to talk about. And you lived it, and you're on the other side of it, and you could help a lot of people. But podcast. It's basically you're sharing all the things you've learned with mindfulness to help to spirituality, religion, philosophy, all those type things, right? You've had some killer guests on there too, man.
Yeah. Do you know John Michael Talbot?
I do know John Michael Talbot.
I've had him on my podcast.
Wow.
We talked about Catholicism. We talked about his book that came out. He very insightful, very interesting guy. I didn't know much about him until I was learning about Catholicism, specifically the Franciscan monks and St. Francis of Assisi. When I started learning about him, I read a book by John Michael Talbot, and that got me interested. And I reached out to him. I had to work. Took a couple months to get him.
Absolutely.
To get him on, to give it on. But when we did, I felt like we had a great conversation.
That's awesome. That's the beautiful thing about, like, if you didn't have your podcast, would you have had that conversation?
No.
Would you have even thought to have the conversation?
No.
And would he have taken your call?
Probably not.
Right. That's why I think everybody needs a podcast, right? So, shameless plug, right? Yeah. We have an amazing team here that the same team that produces this one, they're doing it for a lot of folks these days. This state-of-the-art studio that we're in today these folks are renting it out, and they're doing some pretty awesome stuff in here. It's going to be hitting the press very, very soon. But everybody needs a podcast because of the doors that it opens up and the networking opportunities that it creates, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was having a discussion about this earlier. It's a social activity.
Boom.
Right? We need that. I mean, that's just human nature, right? And especially with the last couple of years of COVID, where people are not going out as much, especially during the lockdown. It's like a podcast is like a conversation that you don't necessarily have to engage with. You're almost right there. You've got your headphones on. You're listening to the podcast. It's because you want that interaction, and you might not be getting it in your workplace or at home, right? Like for me specifically, I like podcasts that talk about deep things. Psychology, religion, right? When I'm listening to these podcasts, I almost imagine myself having a conversation with these people like, oh, I like this point, but I would say this. And that's the social aspect of it.
That's awesome. I think it's one for sure. Well, not to mention, everybody should, if they don't, want to serve others for the good of mankind, to give people hope, to give people insight, happiness, and all those type things, make people feel good. And this is one of the ways that's another thing that you can get from having a podcast is people call me all the time. And I love those calls when they're like, dude, I just wanted to tell you, like, I'm loving it. Keep doing it. It's made a difference in my life. It's incredible. And the exposure to maybe folks they didn't know were around there. Now all of a sudden they're binging on all of their stuff. The guests will come on, like people are going to be wanting to get your book. They're going to be checking out your podcast because you're here today, right? So I can't say enough. I was late to the podcast world. I didn't believe in them for a long time, and now it's just like I don't understand how you could, if you're any type of brand, could not have one.
Indeed. I mean, even like any business.
Yeah.
Any niche, there's a podcast for everything, right? Think about psychologists, right? Dr. Phil, right? Before Dr. Phil was pretty narrow in the field, right? There weren't many people doing what he's doing. Now, any psychologist, any therapist can have a podcast and be spreading this information.
That's right.
Right? It's like, this to me is kind of like what the media should be. This is what news companies should be like.
Yes.
Because you know what? Not everybody wants to hear from actors and actresses, people who don't care about the average Joe. We are normal people having a normal conversation. And that's what's beautiful about podcasts is all of these kinds of conversations happening from every part of society.
Yeah, it's we all have, I say leadership's for everybody, because if somebody goes and gets an ice cream cone at that place over there because you had it and you said it was good, you just led them there, right? So that's influence and leadership. And it's so important that you understand that responsibility. Like, all the people that, all the guests that come here are, they deserve to be here. They should be here. They're vetted out properly. And then the information that they're giving is real.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that,
that
matters. But more importantly, like when you mentioned the news before, there's this phrase that we used to use in the past, and it was called, you put the word good in front of news. It was called good news. You don't really hear much of that anymore. It's mostly just now all of a sudden the only news you get is bad, right? So it kind of opened the door for this platform. And I go to a lot of my favorite podcasts for inspiration and good news. You know what I'm saying? So I listen to more podcasts than television these days.
Yeah, me too. Same things with YouTube, right? I mean, and it's about time management. What are you doing with your time?
That's right.
If you've got a couple hours to do something, are you going to sit and watch a show or learn something new that you didn't know before?
Amen.
Right? I mean, watch a lecture on something. Like now universities are uploading lectures. That's not for everybody. I get it. But like somebody like myself, the other night, Katie's asleep on the couch. I'm watching a lecture on YouTube from psychology from Yale University, right? I mean, like that's such a unique thing. And again, use your time how you want. Mm-hmm. But I wrote this down on my phone the other day. I had a moment, and I try to like write these things down when I have them. And what I said was, is this meaningful?
Woo-hoo.
And you can use that in every moment of your life.
Absolutely.
Whatever you're doing, right? Because the question is, human beings, we thrive off of meaning, right? Everybody wants to know, right? If God came down, right? If there is a God and God came down,
right?
What do you think everybody would ask? What is this all for?
Sure.
What's the meaning? Why am I doing this, right? But because there is nobody to truly answer that, the only person that can answer it is yourself. What do you want it to be? What are you spending your time doing with this time? Mm-hmm. And how are you making it meaningful? But if you do that, if you ask yourself, is this meaningful, right? When you go to a job interview, and if you got to pick between two jobs, is this meaningful? What you're learning in school, is this meaningful? When you're with other people, is this meaningful?
That's right. When so the word mindfulness, would you say that one of the first things that you became mindful of was the choices, the quality of choices you make?
Absolutely. Because, and the funny thing is that mindfulness is almost like a paradox, because it's really about emptying your mind, right? Our minds and our brains are this beautiful organic computer. It's so fast and it's so advanced, but we don't know how to use it right. And what happens is we sit around and we worry and obsess and use it for that instead of trying to answer questions, solve problems, think about things constructively, and is this meaningful?
That's right.
Are we asking ourselves, is this meaningful?
Right.
Instead, and there's a number of reasons, but let's just play this one out, right? You're sitting at home and you've got a job interview tomorrow, right? Is your brain and your mind thinking about the wonderful opportunity you're going to have and the benefits of this job you're going to get? Probably not. Most people are worried. Oh man, I hope I don't say the wrong thing. I hope I don't freak out, or I hope I'm not late, or I hope I'm not right. What is that? Those are things that haven't even happened.
Oh man.
That's the future, right? Mindfulness is the present moment. Not being out there or back there, being right here, right now in this room.
Will Smith, who I love, is an incredible student in a lot of these things. And, the only reason I know this stuff is because I was seeking knowledge, and I found some popular platforms like YouTube where there's unlimited amounts of it, and there's tons from Will Smith. And he talks about, I can't remember, it was either one of his birthdays, I guess it was 50 maybe, where he was going to go bungee jumping. And he talked about how he wasted the 48 hours leading up to it because of fear and thinking about what if this goes wrong, what if this goes wrong. And then of course it didn't. And then on the other side of it, he said, man, looking back, what I figured out is I wasted those 2 days, because if that was the last moments that I had, I wasted the last 2 days not enjoying them, thinking about, an outcome that may or may not happen. And then he follows that up with, he says, God puts the greatest things in life on the other side of fear.
Now imagine wasting your whole life. Imagine if you wasted your whole life being afraid, which is what a lot of people do.
Right.
Even if it's not every waking moment you're anxious, right? But if every opportunity that comes your way, you're neglecting it or you're afraid of it, that's the problem, right? In the military, a lot of the things we have to do, like obstacle courses, or like the first time I fast roped out of a helicopter, that sucks. I hate heights. I am not a fan.
It sounds really awesome.
It's cool, but like I hate heights. So like you get in this helicopter, you go up 40 feet and you got this rope out in front of you. And if you've ever seen the movie Black Hawk Down, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And the rope isn't right in front of you. You got to reach out.
No.
And there's nothing holding you down.
No.
You got to reach out and you got to grab the rope and you got to pull your body out of the helicopter, wrap your feet on the rope and slide down. For somebody who doesn't like heights, like myself, this is probably my worst nightmare. And back then, I was, again, like 220 pounds, and so I'm very top-heavy. And when I come down hard. And I'm not landing on the ground on my 2 feet. I'm literally feet, butt, back, hard, just pop, pop, just like that. And so it's like my worst nightmare. But again, the difference in this situation is that I didn't have time to be afraid because it was just instantaneous.
Yeah.
And what if you just treated life like that? Instead of like waiting to make a decision, you just do it. Now, some people might argue, well, sometimes you got to really think about it and you got to plan things out. Sure, of course. But
thinking is not waiting, though.
Right.
Thinking is proactive. It's forward movement. Well, wait's a 4-letter word.
Yeah, that's true. So don't hesitate. Make a decision, then do it.
That's right. Man, that's great. That's fantastic. Let's bounce around just a little bit for a minute. So talk to me about your book, because I'm not a big long book guy. I could be. I choose not to be, right? So, but it's because I get as much I listen to podcasts in spurts. I like to hear the clips and highlights from them, and then go fill in the blanks and stuff like that. It's kind of like watching the movie trailer before you see the movie. That's the way I learn, right? So you got your book. And what gave you the idea to do it? You obviously didn't wait to make the decision to make it happen. It's the cosmetics of it's great looking. It's fantastic. I freaking love it. So, and it literally lives all over the house, where a lot of times it lives in my bag, where I take it with me all the time, So, let's tell everybody about the book.
Yeah. Caveman to Philosopher is my life. And I made it short on purpose. Mm-hmm. It's like 110 pages, and I did that on purpose because I wanted people who are not big readers to read it, because there's value in it, right? There's value in not only my story, but the things that I'm offering people. The first half of the book is just telling people why I wrote the book, what experiences I had, right? The very beginning of the book, spoiler alert, is me getting blown up by an IED in the road, right? Wow. And I write about the experience because I want people to get a taste of what that feels like. We have this thing called imagination. When you read a book, your imagination is painting you a picture. And I tried to make that moment of my life as real and as detailed as possible, because I wanted people to understand what it feels like to be in that. And then to come back to the real world, as you were talking about, feeling like expired milk, not knowing who I wanted to be, and being somebody who's been and done these crazy, dangerous things. And I don't feel like I have any purpose. I feel like I have nothing.
Right.
And I don't understand who to be. Coming out of that, finding a way to treat it, to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then in the second half of the book, I just spell it out. I just try to make it simple for people to understand, because it's not an easy thing to explain to somebody how you come, it's kind of like, for anybody that's familiar with Plato, it's Plato's cave, the allegory of the cave. Mm-hmm. Somebody is sitting and they're watching the shapes on the wall until they realize that there's more than just the wall in the cave. And then they climb out of the cave and then they find paradise. That was me. But the hardest part, and what Plato talks about, is going back into the cave to try to help free other people. How do you explain freedom and paradise to other people who haven't experienced it yet?
Right.
You have to, just like the Buddha, just like Jesus, just like any prophet or philosopher that's ever been around, that's what they've all been trying to do and say, right? And actually, before I get into this, I saved this because I felt like this was going to be something real good.
Heck yeah, man.
All right, so this is for the audience, this is from the Gospel of Thomas. This is called a Dead Sea Scroll from the Nag Hammadi. Now, this is very ancient, possibly as ancient as the Bible itself, but there's some drama around it because some people say that this isn't the original Bible, so it's canon. But that's not what's important. What's important here is what Jesus is saying, because there's something very beautiful in here that needs to be heard, okay? And this says, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known. And when you realize that it is you who are sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you will dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. Right? What is it saying there? That sounds like some, old school mumbo jumbo, but what is that saying there? It's saying that what you want, all the things you ever desired, they're in you. They're not outside of you.
That's right.
What's outside of us? Material things, jobs, school, cars, money. That's outside. Happiness is in here because you choose to be happy.
That's right.
And that's it. That's all it's ever been.
That's right.
But if you're not told that from the moment you come out of the womb, then you don't know that.
That's true.
That's what's wrong with the Western society. Ancient Eastern traditions like Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Zen, that's what they were talking about. That's what this has all been about. But my second part of the book is trying to paint a picture of that. I talk about the pillars of reality. I talk about what it means to be a mindful person, what it means to be kind. And the last chapter is called Becoming a Lighthouse, because for somebody that wants to do good in the world, I call that person a lighthouse. Here's the difference, though. The lighthouse doesn't pull the ships in to the harbor, right? What does the lighthouse do? The lighthouse just shows the way home.
Ooh. I'll be using that one, bro. I'll be using that one.
I don't have a trademark, so go ahead.
Let's talk about that that gospel though that you read for a second, because that was read that one more time. Read that one more time.
Yeah, it's really good, and this is a very long document, and there's lots of good stuff. I just picked kind of one of my favorites.
No, it's good.
So, all right. So I'm going to read the whole thing.
Okay.
I'm going to read this whole section here. Jesus said, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you will dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty."
So we've talked about this before. There's what I got out of that was, and this is so all of the gurus, the coaches out there, all the things that that I might have been labeled or all my colleagues are labeled, and this is the same thing if you seek help from your pastor. They're all going to say one thing in common. That is, like, you have to have a healthy relationship with yourself.
Yes.
And we talked about this before. There was it was a podcast, I guess, before podcasts were a thing. The Red Table Talk that Jada and Will Smith have, and they talked about in depth about how when Will was at the top of his game, he was actually like the worst version of himself. He had the worst relationship with himself, and that was when their marriage was the worst. And she said something to him that was extremely profound. She looked at him dead in the face and said, "How can you expect me to like you if you don't like you? How can you expect me to like somebody you don't like?"
That's right. That's the most powerful thing that anyone could say.
That's right.
Because, and this is literally the content of my next book and this thing that I'm trying to create called the Harmon Method, right? There's three things that are really important, in my opinion, okay? These are three things that I think that need to be cultivated somehow, and hopefully that I can cultivate them into therapy.
Yeah.
The first one is loving yourself, self-love. Compassion, which is love for others. And then finally, forgiveness. Now, that might seem like some lovey-dovey, hippie hand-holding stuff, but guess what? Like, what do you want out of life? Do you want to be angry? Do you want to be sad? Do you want to hate people? Or do you want love.
Yeah.
Not just for others, but for you.
Right.
Have you ever been told to love yourself, right? Other than maybe in passing with your mom and dad. And
You know,
didn't
in
really
the
take it to
past,
heart.
in the past, you were called selfish if you thought too much of yours. There's a difference in being selfish versus having a relationship with. I mean, the better you can't even get off help people on an airplane that crashes if you don't put the oxygen mask on yourself first. If you can't breathe,
That's right.
you can't help people, right? So you have to have a certain amount of health within yourself to be able to do good, you know, and lead from the front. If anything else, there's it's amazing to me how, like, I'm 41 years old. Okay, I didn't even really start to understand any of these things till I was in my mid to late 30s, right? My wife and I's journey with our between our relationship and ourselves, and even as parents, has been. We've accomplished more chapters in the last 4 to 5 years than we did in the first decade, all of them, the decades before. I don't really know all the things that we're learning. I heard my grandparents say them. I heard my parents say them. I heard all, but I didn't. It didn't resonate. I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. Where do you think, like, this isn't new? None of this stuff is new. Why in the world are so many folks? Why don't they get it?
I think that that's probably a multifaceted question, but I'll try to answer it as simply as possible. First of all, I think it's because we are not told that from the moment that we're born. This is a Western society problem. Because if you go back thousands of years ago, they were told this, right?
Okay.
What does Jesus say, right? Love others as much as you love yourself. He made it very simple, right? Everybody might think that Christianity might be this difficult thing, but it's really not. Jesus made it very simple.
Think about that. Love others as much as you love yourself. Well, if you love yourself as much as you can, doesn't that mean you're going to, and you do it right, doesn't that mean you're going to love everybody else as much as you can too?
That's right. That's the secret. Because if you don't do that, right? Like, what's the incentive? People, humans, as we are, we're very incentive-based. We need a reason to do something. If you don't have any good feelings about yourself, right? Because if you have the absence of love for yourself, what does that mean? Then that means you probably have depression, anxiety, hate, fear, right? Like, if that's what's consuming you all the time, then why would you ever be able to have anything for anyone else? Why would you treat anyone else with kindness or respect if you don't treat yourself that way?
And it's going to affect everything you do from performance and anything that you do.
Yeah.
It's going to be affected. Right?
And this is the idea of karma. This is really what karma is. It's not this magical thing that people came up with. No, this is what karma is, right?
Yeah.
Like, our actions are what create the future things that we're going to have to deal with. And we're going to keep repeating mistakes over and over again until we figure it out. But I think we could wrap all of this up into one thing, and that's called self-awareness.
Woohoo,
And
yes,
we
sir.
don't have that.
No, we do not. We do not. We do not.
Only 15%. Now, that some studies show, and I'm sure it can vary, but studies show that only 15% of humanity is self-aware. Lots of people claim to be self-aware, but only 15%, maybe less, maybe a little more, but right around that ballpark are self-aware, which means that 80 to 85% of the rest of the world, they're driving solo with blinders on. They have no clue what they're doing or why they're doing it.
Somebody told them that they needed to do it, and they just do it.
That's right.
The Western school system has kind of gotten that way a little bit.
That's right.
You're
not allowed to ask questions. And if you ask questions, you're going to be frowned upon. And honestly, the teachers don't know the answers unless it's from the book that's in front of them.
Yeah, and nowadays too, they can risk a lot of their own livelihood by saying much outside of the book or having an opinion or anything else, And I know when I was growing up, I was blessed with unbelievable teachers. Amazing teachers that still they keep up with me, and I keep up with them today. And they were just amazing human beings. But what made it the reason they were amazing is because they were them. They were authentic. They had the ability back then to be authentic, at least.
Yeah. One of the most original examples of what we're talking about is Socrates.
Okay.
Right? Socrates was most famous for asking people, how do you know that? Right? Because Socrates didn't claim to know anything. The only thing that he said he knew was that I know nothing.
Wow.
And he was called the wisest person. So what he did is he walked around, and anybody that claimed to know something, right? well, I know what virtue is. Oh, okay. Well, can you explain that to me? Well, how do you know that, right? And you can do that today.
Yes.
Take any smart person. I don't care who it is. And I will defend this. Anybody that claims to be smart and says they know something, all I have to do is continually ask you, how do you know that?
Yeah, I'm
sure?
I'm going to start using that because my phrase that I ask the question is usually based on what? What are you basing that off? But I think the way that Socrates said it was a little bit more relatable.
Yeah. How do you know that to be true? And if it is true, tell me, show me how it's true. Explain it to me. And what ended up happening was that all of these people came to the same conclusion. Well, they'd say, I don't know, right? And that is the baseline of what Socrates was doing. But it is ultimately what ended up getting him killed. He had to drink poison because people were like, this is ludicrous. He's ruining society. We can't let him just keep walking around telling people they don't know anything. But could you imagine doing that today, like on CNN or Fox News, and calling an anchor out? Well, how do you know that?
Yeah.
Tell me something. Show me something.
Yeah.
How do you know that?
Yeah.
People lose their minds because they don't know as much as they like to think.
Sure.
That's just, it's okay to not know something and be humble.
Because they're trying to be first, not accurate, not the most accurate.
Right. I mean, and again, I'm just picking on the news, but we could say that about anybody.
Well, there's some great ones too. Just like there's no matter who you look at, there's going to be good eggs and bad eggs, right?
That's
so
right.
No matter what.
That's right. But the bottom line is that anybody that thinks they know something, you have to ask yourself, how much does this person actually know? And this, honestly, with the last couple of years between COVID and Ukraine and, politics, this has really showed me personally that people don't know what they're talking about. I've seen so many people speak up about something with having no critical background, no research, right? Like their research is reading a headline to a news article, but not actually reading the news article itself. And that's a problem. So this takes me into the next thing, which is critically important, right? The Buddha said, what we think we become. Okay. So
we talk a lot about that through call it manifestation now, right?
Yes, that's the same thing. Mm-hmm. So now imagine being somebody who thinks they know everything or thinks that they know something about this specific field, right? Whether they really know it or not, the matter is that they think they believe it.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people that you can ask them the question, well, how do you know that? And eventually they will get to the place where they say, I don't know. Because how does anyone know anything?
That's right. It's crazy when you think about it that way, isn't it?
Yes.
So PTSD. All right. So there's multiple layers of this, right? Or the degrees of it, I guess you could say, right? So I'm green when it comes to this. Okay. So help me out a little bit. What is the PTSD? What does it stand for? What does it mean? And like, what are the degrees of it, like, so to speak?
Okay.
The 30,000 foot view.
So PTSD itself stands for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
Okay. But then there's also PTS, which is post-traumatic stress.
Okay.
Where it doesn't become a disorder.
Okay.
Right. And
that just means you function like a functioning alcoholic type thing.
Right. Or maybe it's temporary.
Okay.
Right. Something critical happens in your life, and then you have PTS. But it goes away after like a couple months, right? With treatment and regular whatever, but like a
divorce, loss of a child, things like that. And,
right. Yeah. Car accident.
Yeah. Okay.
Something even like that. Right. And the thing is that PTSD has been thrown around a lot. So we kind of, typically we only kind of think about it in military terms, but that's just not the case. Anybody that has had some kind of stress can get PTS or PTSD. Driving a school bus, you can get PTSD, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it happens. So, but let's go backwards. Like when you go to the Vietnam War, or even before that, veterans coming back that had these kind of problems and symptoms, they didn't call it PTSD back then. They called it shell shock, which didn't give it really any credibility. It wasn't something that you could be like, it didn't have the same weight as PTSD, okay? And there wasn't treatment for this kind of thing back then like there is now. Nowadays, you can, like military units have behavioral health units where you can go and get that kind of thing looked at and you can go and get help. Back then, they did not have that. That wasn't a thing. Now, therapy in and of itself has been kind of working on this problem, but it's really only been in the last 20 years that we've really been tackling it hardcore because of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah. As far as this, we've given it a name. We now fully understand it for the most part. What is new is how they're trying to treat it. Things like, MDMA, or ayahuasca or mushroom, psilocybin. Those are things that are being played with and tampered with in certain like academic settings to see what it does. They do show some effect, but there's not enough to definitively say like, yes, this is going to cure it.
Okay.
But so that's the bottom line, is that there isn't necessarily a cure. Okay. There's not a cure. There are ways of treating it and dealing with it, but that's why I think that what I have done in my story is so important, because I don't want, some of the stories I have are a little hardcore, and I don't want to like say them in like, it might offend some people, right? But I just want to say that like I was in such a place where I was acting in such an irrational and violent behavior that it really had people in my unit questioning me, like, dude, what are you doing? You know, like I was doing and saying things that were very off color. Okay. You know, I had moments where like I heard things that weren't real. And in psychology, that's called auditory hallucinations.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily seeing something that's not there, but it's hearing something that's not there. And it wasn't until everything came unraveled that I needed to go to therapy. I had to suck it up, and it was uncomfortable.
Sure.
I really didn't like it at first. I was so angry and violent. You know what I mean? Again, like I'm an infantry guy. I'm in the military. Like I've just really not that long ago came out of combat, and like I wasn't in the mood to just be toyed with. And like the first session I had with this counselor, I sit down, she's looking at me, and she's just staring at me for like 5 minutes. Doesn't say anything. And I lost it. I got up and I flipped my chair. I'm like, what are you staring at? Why are you looking at me like that? And she goes, calm down. She's like, I just wanted to see if you're really triggered. Like, I just needed to see if you're really that angry. And I was like, well, congratulations. Yeah, I'm that angry, you know? And so like that kind of approach bothered me at first, and it took me so long to warm up to it. And then the problem with therapy is that sometimes you get up here and you're like, oh man, you know what? I feel better. I don't want to go anymore. And then you come right back down. And then it's like, all right, well now I got to go back and this and that. And I kept doing that until I finally got out of the military. And then when I got out of the military, I went to go see a therapist, a civilian therapist. And probably 2 or 3 sessions in, he fell asleep while I was talking to him.
Oh, wow.
So that did not sit well with me. So I never went back. But what it did is it forced me to look for alternative methods. Now, what I will say is I'm not picking on therapy because I think that it is critically important. But what I will say is that for me personally, I needed to sort some of this out on my own.
Sure. I would think you would go to therapy to empower you to do that.
Right. And that's what I needed first. Now I see the benefit. But again, it's kind of like that self-aware thing we're talking about, right? How can you let somebody tell you like, hey, you're a narcissist?
Sure.
You're not a nice person, right? You're not going to sit there and listen to me. Like, oh, what does this person know? They don't know who I am. They don't know me, which is exactly what I was doing. But when I realized I had these problems and then I took responsibility for the way I was behaving, then it became easier for somebody to tell me. Because then I realized I'm like, I don't know myself like I think I do. I don't know myself as well as I should. So I need to let somebody else help me with this.
You're like, so I've said it on this show multiple times. We've talked about it when my wife was on here and other folks, that the problems that her and I had for a long time were 100% because of me, not because of her. And the reason is I didn't do them on purpose. I had lost, what's the way to describe it? I had forgotten who I was, I guess. Like I knew in my mind, you grow up and over time you get awareness of I'm a good person. I make good grades. I do certain things right. I go to church, whatever it may be. And I care about others. And then, that gets ingrained in you. And then over time, I wasn't that person anymore, but I was, and here I was, and up here I was, but my actions were not that. And most of the time it was because of just lack of confidence or whatever. And it took me understanding that like I was hiding behind all those things. I didn't want to recognize them. I didn't want help. It took me going. My wife and I went to counseling with one of our most favorite people in the world, Pastor Roger Patton, who changed both of our lives together, including mine. And but like it was okay. I looked at it as a sign of weakness, which it was not. It was actually a sign of strength, right? To let it all out there, and I'm not perfect, so I don't know I was hiding all my flaws from everybody. Those flaws are what make you, you know? And And they also make you understand, like when you wouldn't appreciate good without evil, right? So it actually empowered all my strengths and the good things. I recognized those more because I wasn't hiding from all the things that I needed to work on and embrace, right? So it's crazy. I think most people go through that, the image crisis of over their lifetime and all that. So I think people go through that a lot. And then when you hold those things in, the longer you hide from them, the bigger they get. And when they do finally surface, they come out with the biggest voice ever, like roar. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's big. And that was where I did. I imploded and took down people with me, and I didn't care.
Yeah. I feel that. I mean, it was the same thing for me. That's why I was doing steroids. That's why I was bodybuilding. And to back that up, to explain why, because when I first got in the military, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. Man, I mean, I got picked on like it was high school, and I'm like, what? I'm like, we're all supposed to be on the same team. Like, what? Why are you guys bullying me?
Yeah.
So, and then when I got to Afghanistan, that changed me.
Yeah.
I hated people. I hated talking to them. I hated looking at them, because what happened to me over there was I learned that people are not who they say they are, and people are not trustworthy because of things that happened.
Without getting, and people can watch the news if they want to get into the back and forth of all that stuff. But like, you know, we protect our kids. We don't show our kids R-rated movies when they're 4 years old. We don't let them encounter things that they're not ready to comprehend or absorb, right? So we protect them from that to a certain degree. I think these days we probably protect them too much and too long. Like I haven't seen anything like you've seen. I haven't experienced anything like you have, but I've seen the worst in people, and I've seen people do horrific things. And that changes you. It does. It totally changes you the first time you see it. My son said something last night when my wife was talking to him about, like, you know, just be careful if anybody ever offers you like some ibuprofen or something like that because you got a headache. Just like, you know, you shouldn't trust. You need to get the ibuprofen yourself, type thing. Don't take it. Don't put anything in your bodies that you're not 100% sure what it is. And basically he finished up the conversation with, well, this is what I do, blah blah blah. I'm good, and it's just because he hadn't been had yet.
That's right.
He hadn't been had yet. So. And with all the things that is going on in our country today, it's if you haven't been exposed to that, you might not have a realistic feel for what's actually out there. Like, you've seen it. Like when you say you kind of lost faith in humanity, people, to a certain degree,
yeah,
because you're surrounded by nothing but bad ones.
That's right. And you know, to give some like quick examples, right? We had these two little kids that worked for us when I was in Afghanistan. We paid them handsomely. These two little kids, we paid them more than anybody in their village of hundreds of people made. Mm-hmm. More than the police, more than the army. I mean, these kids were loaded, right? And we worked with them. They came to our compound every day and they did stuff for us. And, you know, where I was, we were in the middle of nowhere. We weren't on a big base. Like, it was just me and like 13 other dudes in a very tight, confined area. And we had to protect ourselves.
Right.
Because there was nobody else around us, really.
Wow.
We had these two little kids, Commandant and a little Sarge, and we paid them to come in and kind of clean and take care of us and bring us stuff from the bazaar. And about halfway through the deployment, maybe a little bit more than halfway through, we caught them one time inside our compound taking pictures of where we were sleeping, where our computers were, and it's probably because somebody paid them to do that, right? I mean, we can't really try to analyze it too much. And we let them keep working for us, but we never looked at them the same way.
That's right.
Like, you can't trust somebody now like that. Like, because what we were doing, if any one person knew how vulnerable we were, they could have taken us all out in the middle of the night, no problem. No problem. The only thing that kept us safe was that the people around us didn't know how unguarded we were. And those little kids did. And that's why they were taking the pictures. Who knows what they did with them. Thankfully, nothing ever came out of it. But then here's another example. They
could have been just taking them because they thought, man, when we grow up, we want a bed like that. Or you just don't know. But at the same time, you don't know.
That's right.
And if they're for hire.
Yeah.
And you don't know, like you say, you don't know who paid them or whatever. And why would they do that behind your back?
That's right. Especially, we were out on a mission. And it was just them and a couple other people. So nobody was really watching them. So then that kind of adds to the thing. But the one, there was lots of IEDs where I was, and the one serious one that I ran over, we pretty much figured out that it was, we had people that we paid, Afghan army guys that we paid to look for mines in front. They would walk out in front of our vehicles with metal detectors and looking for the IEDs, right? Well, the day before we went on this big mission, we cut their pay in half because we hadn't run into IEDs for weeks. There had been nothing. So we're just kind of like, well, we don't really need to be paying them that much when there's nothing going on.
Yeah.
And then the next day when we go out on this big mission, their vehicle and those people in front, they didn't run it over. My truck ran it over.
Oh, geez.
And what we concluded was that it was them. They put that bomb in the road because we cut their pay in half and they wanted us to pay them more. So that ruined my ability to trust people.
Yeah.
And at the time it was just the Afghanis, right? But then when I came back, you got to understand, like, I was home within a couple weeks. Like, there was no transition really from Afghanistan to the United States. There's no buffer time. Like, within 2 weeks, I was back going to the grocery store.
Wow.
Using a regular toilet, right? Like driving a car. And that distrust for people, that didn't go away. So I didn't trust anybody for a long time.
How do you think trust in others affects the trust in yourself?
Well, I mean, it makes you feel like you're isolated.
Well, and literally isolation leads to further, deeper isolation, right? So,
right.
When you, that's one of the reasons, is that why those experiences change people? Like, because again, if you don't trust yourself, right, and nobody, most people shouldn't, because they say all the time, I'm going to lose weight, I'm going to do all these things, and they're lying to themselves, right?
That's
so
right.
It's, which is, then they get unhappy with themselves and they project it onto others, and and one thing leads to the next, right? So how much do you think that affected, well, it affected a lot, obviously, but like, how much do you think for like just the regular person that doesn't have to go over there and deal with all that stuff? We get to drive around without people in front of us and thinking we're going to blow up, right? So,
yeah. Well, I mean, think about, a lot of people probably don't realize this, but, you learn about lying when you're a little kid. And your parents might tell you don't lie, but the first time that you lie and get away with it, that stays with you. And then you learn that I can lie and not get in trouble. I can get out of this and that. And not everybody stays that way, right? Especially if you're very religious and you know that lying is a sin or whatever.
Yeah.
But for the regular person, lying is a tool, right? And it doesn't just go away.
Say that again. Lying is
a tool. And we learn that very young. And if it doesn't get treated, if we don't do something about it, then what happens? We grow up to lie more. And it doesn't even have, like, and I'm saying this, and it doesn't have to be.
It is habitual.
It's habitual, and we don't even realize it all the time, because what do we say? We're like, well, it's a little white lie because I don't want to hurt this person's feelings. Exaggerations
are another form of that. I'm guilty as heck of that for probably 10, 15 years. And I did it because of insecurities, because of my relationship with myself. So I made myself better than I was. I projected better.
Right. But the more you lie, what then that leads to is gaslighting, which is like lying about lying, right? Mm-hmm. How many times have you been with somebody who catches you lying, and then you got to lie more to cover that up, right? And then what happens if you're doing that, right? Let's just talk about if you're doing it to somebody else. If you lie and somebody catches you and you lie and they're trying to confront you about it, and then you lie more, you're making that person feel crazy.
That's right.
And then now bring it back on you, right? Because now what are you talking about? You're talking about a narcissist. Mm-hmm. You're talking about somebody who they can't deal with reality. Their reality is whatever it is from moment to moment, whatever reality they're making up.
Right.
But we don't realize that that's a lot of people. Even if they're not a full-blown narcissist, most people lie about something. So again, how can you fully trust people when you know they're lying, right? And eventually, if you get burned enough times, you realize, oh shit, this is what people are doing.
I might have lied, not even knowing I was lying, thinking it was the truth, because I might have started to believe some of the lies of the past.
Right.
That's crazy. That's awesome stuff, dude. That is fantastic. Well, honestly, you and I could take this conversation. It could never end, and we could go in a million different directions, right? But I got some bullet points that we really wanted to hit today, right? So, all right. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but let's make sure all of our folks truly truly understand the gold here. So how did you use mindfulness to help your symptoms of PTSD?
Okay. In short, it was mainly just taking responsibility.
Oh my gosh.
Instead of blaming other people, right? Blaming the army, blaming the government, blaming Afghan people, right? I realized it was my fault, right? I signed the paper to go do those things. Yeah. I was the one that knew that there was danger. And then when the danger happened, what did I do? I blamed other people. I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Of course those things happened.
You accepted responsibility for getting blowed up on the side of the road by saying, I cut their pay in half and did this and that. We've been saying this a lot. When you place blame, you give up the opportunity to fix it. You give up responsibility.
That's right. But then you don't have to feel, once you take responsibility, you can stop feeling bad. You can stop feeling anxious, and you can stop worrying, because if you take the responsibility, then it's all on you and there's no more problem there. And then the second thing about mindfulness is the present moment, like we talked about earlier.
Yes.
Stop dwelling in the past, because that's neither here nor there anymore, right? Learn from it, but don't dwell on it. And don't obsess about something that hasn't happened yet, right? Make plans, have dreams, have goals, but don't obsess. Don't get lost out there. Be right here. Because if you don't do that, what are you missing out on? You're missing out on the life that you already have. How many people already are living the very life they want so badly, but they're so busy thinking about more, they're not accepting what they have right now.
Guilty. Guilty. My wife would be like, She'd be like, all right. So help me understand, what is meditation to you and why is it helpful?
Okay. Meditation, a lot of people hear this word. This is kind of becoming a trend, at least in Western culture. Meditation is very ancient, it's very old. But in simple terms, all you're doing is you're just trying to sit and be still, and you're trying to focus on your breathing. It's not what is it, it's why is it so important.
There it is.
Okay? The reason why meditation is important is because if you can't sit still for 5 minutes, that's the problem. People say all the time when they talk about meditation, like, oh, I can't sit down for that long. It's like, well, you got a problem.
That's right.
You're so anxious, you're so focused on what you need to do and what you want to do that you can't even sit still for 5 minutes.
And behavior, attitude, so many things are choice. Our choice. Every single person can sit still for 5 minutes.
That's it.
It's crazy. A lot of people will take medication to do that too.
Yes. Instead of doing what causes them, doing something that fixes the problem. Because think about this, like when people think about resting, right? Like maybe you're going to go sit on the couch and watch TV. Is that really resting?
Right.
If you're watching something that's emotionally taxing, that's not resting.
And you're not resting this, are you?
That's right. No, you're not. But when you're meditating, you're not doing anything. You're really doing nothing. And one of my favorite people, Ram Dass, said it's becoming nothing. Because guess what? When you become nothing, then there's no anxiety, there's no problem, there's nothing to worry about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So talk to me about ego and how it relates to the mind.
Okay. So this is probably one of the most ancient things that have been discussed, whether it was Buddhist monks, philosophers, psychologists, right? Your ego is just what makes you you, okay? Everything that you believe yourself to be, it's really an addiction. It's some kind of obsession. It's something that you are influenced by your parents, your school, your friends, okay? All of that makes up your identity, okay? But that doesn't mean that it's not real. It just means that what you're perceiving to be you, it's not that individualistic like people want it to be.
All right. So we can stay there for a second, because I was told a long time ago, show me the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I'll show you your future. It's who you hang around, you absorb. Everybody starts. There's a reason that poor people all live in the same part of town, and people that are have a lot of money live in another. And who you hang out with, and as a parent, you tell your kids, don't hang out with that guy, don't hang out with that kid. But as adults, we've stopped doing that. At some point in time, you don't do it for yourself.
That's right.
There's some of my best friends from my younger years are amazing people, and I love them today, but I can't spend a lot of time with them because we're not going to the same places.
Yeah, that's true.
That's where the growing apart phrase, we grew apart, came from, right?
Right.
So ego is what?
Ego is your identity.
Identity.
It's your identity, but it's your identity that you have built over however many years you've been alive, okay? And I want to use one small example. A friend of mine is a professor at Vanderbilt named Robert Talise, and he wrote this book called Overdoing Democracy. And in the book, he basically explains how people's politics can be whittled down to where they go get their coffee, whether they go get coffee at Starbucks or they go get it at Dunkin' Donuts. But if you go to Starbucks, you're more likely to be a left-leaning liberal. If you go to Dunkin' Donuts, you're more than likely going to be a Republican conservative. And there's a bunch of reasons why that is.
Interesting.
But my point with that is that that's part of your identity.
Okay.
That's part of your identity. Why do you vote Democrat? Why do you vote Republican? If you ask somebody that's very much into politics, like Socrates, why do you vote that way? Well, because I believe in this and this. Why do you believe in that?
Yeah.
Well, because this. I'm like, okay, well then why? Who told you that? Oh, my mom told me this when I was oh, so it was your mom. Okay, so what's you?
That's right.
And I do this exercise with people where I ask them, I'm like, who are you? And always the first answer is, well, I'm this and I go to school for this or I work at this job. And I stop and I'm like, no. Not what are you? Who are you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm Cameron, all right? Well, who is Cameron? And that's usually where it stumps people. And
That's
like,
right. Isn't that crazy?
That's right. But that's the speed bump. Who is Cameron? And then you might go back to saying, well, what is Cameron? But that's not who is Cameron. What is that thing that we're calling me?
Roger asked me that, and I immediately, so you mentioned ego. Part of the reason that I became the not best version of myself that I was is because I knew I wasn't, and my ego didn't allow me to help myself. I didn't want to seek help, not even from myself. I didn't want to seek help. I was hiding behind everything, right? But he asked me that question. He said, who are you? And I was like, and I did the same thing. I was like, well, I'm a business guy. I'm an athlete, musician. But he said, no. Who are you? I was like, well, I'm Nick. And he was like, and who is that? And it stumped me. And, but I grinned. And he said, that's good. He's like, because you're open to finding out. You understand that that's the next step. And I thought, holy cow, I used to hide from that question. And I would lie as if I knew who it was. I would fake it. And then all of a sudden I realized when he asked me that second question, which was, who is Nick? I was like, holy crap, that's my problem. I've lost it. I don't know who I am anymore. And that's my struggle. And that's why everybody else around me is miserable and why I'm miserable.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get that. That's,
we're all pretending to be somebody. We just think that that's who we really are, is who we're pretending to be.
get out, bro. That's what I'm talking about. Uh-huh. All right. So, talk to me about our thoughts and what we think and how that creates a perceived reality.
Right. So here's a great and very simple way to think about this, okay? You're in traffic. I love this example. You're in traffic. Somebody cuts you off. What's the first thing you think? For most people, it's, oh, man, this jerk cut me off, man. Oh, man, I hate being in this. And what's the reality? Because this is perception. Mm-hmm. What's reality? More than likely, you're not going to get to know what true reality is unless you physically know this person. You can get up next to them and ask, like, hey, why'd you do that?
There could have been a pregnant woman in the car.
Absolutely. Everybody knows that. But not everybody remembers that.
Yeah.
And this is a perception problem. And that's the problem with our mind, is that we, it's kind of like when you have a muscle twitch or a pain somewhere and you're like, oh, I got to get on WebMD and I got to you always assume the worst. Mm-hmm. Why? Because we're afraid. Why are we afraid? Because we don't want to die. Mm-hmm. Fear comes down to three things: fear of death, fear of pain, and fear of loss. Mm. All of it. Every fear you could possibly have, it always comes
tell
back
me
to
those again. Fear is fear of death,
fear of pain, and fear of loss. Greed, lust, whatever you want to put, in there. It's always one of those things.
Yeah.
And why are we so afraid of death? Because we don't know that it's perfectly safe.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with it. That's what we're here to do.
That's right.
Now, whatever happens after, nobody knows, right? That's an obsession. Yeah. Don't worry about the obsession. This thing it's temporary. We know it's temporary.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do with it? And if you're afraid of dying, then that means you're afraid to live.
So, talk to me about, obviously, you have an incredible story. And it's still being written, by the way, right? And you've talked to us about your time protecting our country. You talked about the issues you faced when you came back. We've talked about the family and home life that you've created. Now you're on top of doing all the things we're talking about. You're going back to school, furthering education, seeking knowledge, all those things. Why is your story important?
It's important because it's a symbol of change, right? Somebody like me, right? I was pretending to be a G.I. Joe. Then I was pretending to be a bodybuilder. And then I didn't know who I was. And what I found was that I could be whoever I wanted to be. Simple, right? Because it's again, it's all about pretending. But what that means is that if you don't like who you are, change it. If you don't like what you're doing, change it. If you want something, go get it.
Yeah.
Stop wasting time.
Yeah.
Again, go back. This that we have right now is limited. It's temporary. What are you going to do with it? Do you want to spend however long you have with this doing something that makes you miserable, being
Amen.
around people that make you miserable?
Amen.
You don't have to do that.
That's right. That's awesome. That's awesome. We kind of alluded to this a little while ago, but like I was talking about this, I've had some amazing people in here, and Eric Bledsoe and I were talking about he talks a lot about how prayer and how the Bible encourages meditation and all that kind of stuff. And we also talked about how what you alluded to earlier, that a lot of the religions have a very similar story, right? They also have very similar traditions, right?
That's right.
So what are some of the things so a tradition is just something that's happened generation to generation over and over and over again, right? It's Christmas is a tradition. Eating, the family coming over to the house on Thanksgiving, a tradition. Blowing up fireworks, 4th of July, whatever it may be, right? Traditions. What are some things that we can learn from the religious traditions?
Ultimately, all religions want something from you, which is to be a good person. No matter what religion it is, that's what it's about. Be a good person. How do you become a good person in the eyes of God, in the eyes of your community, right? How do you become a Christ-like figure? How do you do that? Well, it's quite simple. You just need to be a good person. You just need to want more for yourself, right? Loving yourself is not selfish.
Thank you.
Loving yourself is not selfish. And I promise you, if you do that first, it makes it easier to love other people because you won't be so obsessed about what other people are doing, right? What is that? The obsession about other people is judgment. Why are we judging? Because we want something that they have that we don't.
That's right.
So give it to yourself. Give yourself what you need, what you want. Become the person you want to be. And then guess what? You have no more reason to be angry. Stop being afraid of dying. Get over that.
That's right.
Just get over it because it's going to happen whether you want it to or
That's
not.
right.
No matter how good technology gets, I don't think we're going to get out of that one. But regardless, if you stop judging people, live your life, stop being afraid of death, that's how you become Christ-like. That is a tradition in and of itself. That's what Jesus was telling people to do anyways. The Buddha, same thing. Buddhists, what are they doing? Meditating. Working on how to become compassionate, loving people. Cultivating compassion. Yeah. How do you cultivate compassion? By practice. You practice compassion.
Yes, sir. Anything that you're going to cultivate is going to be done through practice, right?
That's right.
Awesome. I love that. That's fantastic. So, obviously, dude, you have done the work. You've educated yourself. You're practicing all these. You're doing all these practices every day. You're constantly trying to become a better version of yourself, which is making you a better husband, better father, better friend, all those things. And a lot of that, we mentioned the book earlier, and your podcast, Hermit Radio, which is phenomenal. You guys are diving into this nonstop.
Right.
nonstop. So, and you're bringing in some amazing folks to talk about it too. You breaking them up into what series was I a part of when I was on yours? You said it before. It was the inspirational series.
Yeah, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the particular series, but it was but the whole theme was inspiration.
Yeah.
People who have done, because again, that's what we're doing. Lighthouse.
Yes.
Right? The lighthouse effect. It's
That's right.
Inspiration, trying to show people that there's more, right? And you mentioned something kind of earlier about the news, and there's not much of that good news anymore. And that's a society problem.
Yes.
If we turn that around, if we started having good news, then the attitudes of people would change.
Doesn't that show you kind of how bad the relationships are with humanity, with themselves as a whole? When I would like to, anybody could argue this, but like if all you heard was good news, we'd all be in a lot better mood. We wouldn't be scared all the time. We wouldn't be all these things. We're allowing the information that's being given to us to influence us way too much.
Absolutely. And that is part of the ego problem.
Yes.
You can call it brainwashing, you can call it conditioning, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. And that's the problem, is we're being sucked into that and we don't know any better, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we're living in fear. God, I was reading this thing on Twitter the other day, and let me read this to you.
Go ahead.
This is the most crazy thing I've seen in a while, and I took a screenshot of it to send to my friend because I was like, dude, this is all right. Listen, this is from Axios on Twitter. An invasive species of spider the size of a child's hand is expected to colonize the entire East Coast this spring by parachuting down from the sky, researchers announced. That's the most terrifying thing I've heard in a long time. But it's like, first of all, is that even real? Is that even a real thing? But even regardless if it's real or not, that kind of thing.
Spiders and parachutes. It sounds cool. You know what I'm saying? It sounds cool. I've only been in a parachute once myself. And, we were talking about that earlier. I love this story. My buddy Randy and Tyler put together an incredible fundraiser for MLS research. And basically they partnered up with Adventure Skydiving in Tennessee out in Waverly and Red Bull and a bunch of other people. And a bunch of people paid to go skydiving, and and all the funds went to MLS research. I did it. And I can remember, obviously I'm not a big heights guy, at least I wasn't until then. And I remember getting like all day. I was one of the last people to go, so I had to sit there and watch everybody else go all day long. So I'm thinking about it, dealing with it. We're going through the little training. They're suiting you up. And then you're getting on this plane, and this plane is not a nice plane, right? It's got one purpose and one purpose only. It's all it's made to do, so it's all beat up looking and doesn't look great. And I get on it, and of course I'm nervous, and everybody can tell I'm nervous. So they're having lots of fun with me and doing all kinds of stuff. But we got up to like 8,000 or 9,000 feet, and all of a sudden the door just opened up, and this guy that didn't have a tandem partner with him just rolled out. And I was like, what just happened? And they were like, oh yeah, he's going on his own. He's been doing this for a long time. And I was like, well, Isaiah, it terrified me. And of course, when they do that, they cut the engine of the plane. So my head hit the roof, and I didn't know what happened then too, right? So they thought about that. Then they had tampered with my goggles. So right when this is all happening, my goggle falls off. And I was just, but it was at that moment I thought, well, I'm up here. I might as well enjoy it. And then when I got to the edge of the plane and it was time to go, I just remember that should have been the most terrifying moment there was. And I just made a decision. I said, well, if this is it, I'm going to enjoy it. And then outside of getting married and the birth of my kids, the coolest thing that I can remember in my life was jumping. And you don't feel like you're falling, right? It just felt like I was floating, except for your face is smashed all back from the velocity. And then the parachute opened, and that was the most serene, amazing view ever. It was the first time I'd been up thousands of feet in the air, unobstructed, where you could see full 360. Incredible. When I got to the ground, I was a changed person over that one experience. And so many people won't do that out of fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really beautiful, because that summarizes everything. If you wanted to summarize our entire conversation, that's it.
Yeah.
Just live, that's it. That's regardless if you're religious, spiritual, psychology, whatever you want to put, whatever label, that's it. Just live.
Yeah.
Stop being afraid.
My I can't remember if it was my father or one of my dad's side of the family was very known for their analogies and words were always off the wall, but really almost profound. If not, there was a very thin line between ridiculous and profound when they would say it. But that was one of the things that was always said around the house is, I'm going to go into my grave with skid marks.
That's a good one. I like that.
And that's, to not ruin the conversation too much, there was, in my family, there was a lot of conversation about all the types of skid marks, being from Antioch, Tennessee. But so the podcast is phenomenal. The book is great. You mentioned you got another one. You're thinking about writing another one?
Yeah, I'm working on a project right now called the Harmon Method, which is what we were talking about that earlier.
Yep.
And I'm not quite sure how I'm going to put it all together. I'm doing some research right now. Because mindfulness and positive psychology are kind of the fields that I'm working with right now. They're relatively new. As far as like treating stress, anxiety, depression, PTSD, mindfulness being used by therapists to treat that is actually relatively new. Even though the concepts are not new themselves, the research being done using them is still relatively new. But there's lots of promise. They're using it to treat addiction. And think about that. Stuff that we normally need medications for, we're fixing by making people sit still, by making them think good thoughts and practice how to have good thoughts.
Dude, what my wife and I have learned about through nutrition and what it's done for the healing of our bodies, unbelievable.
Definitely.
We're very holistic, natural folks, and even though I do love Oreo cookies and certain things, when it comes to, like, we eat pretty dang clean, and I've learned that that an intermittent fasting schedule for me totally it took 10 years off, and I feel 100 times better. And there's I don't know, I used to make fun of it.
Right.
I made fun of it until finally I just didn't, and then all of a sudden on the other side I was like, well, this is way better.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certain types of things that I used to live off of from foods, turns out they were the source of most of my problems, all the way down to how I felt about myself.
Yeah. I mean, they're even doing studies now that talk about your brain is connected to your gut, right? Like a lot of the stuff that's going on mentally, it's associated with what's going on in your gut.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't wrap that up to 100%, right? But imagine, I don't even want to speculate on that. But my point is that, that is having something to do with the way we think and feel, right? I mean, even if you just want to say like, I'm overweight and I'm depressed about that, right? Well, I mean, that is something that you can do something about, right?
You can't feel good overweight. It's not as good as you could.
Right.
The good is not actually good. It's just good for that situation right there, right?
That's right.
It's not good all the time. It's, again, and it has, don't hear that we're against modern medicine or any of those things. They're great. They're amazing. I just, for, like you said, you figured out that through modern medicine was the outlet for you to heal yourself.
That's right.
Right?
Yes. And, there's something to be said about like, man, maybe certain medications are stuff that we pull off the shelf in an emergency, right? Maybe
right.
They shouldn't be the go-to method for treating something, right? Like this was a problem.
Not for everybody, for sure.
Certainly, right? Like that was something that I had a problem with when I was in the Army. The counselors and the people I worked with there, all they wanted to do was give me medication.
Yeah.
And I asked them, like, I just want to talk. Can we just try to work some of this out? And they're like, no. They're like, the only way you're going to feel better is if you get medication. And there were guys that I knew that were taking those kinds of medication, and they were dead inside. They didn't enjoy it.
Right.
And it's not
That's not living.
That's not living. And my point is, look at me, right? You said it before. There's a calmness about me, right?
Yep.
And I'm not just externally presenting that. I really do feel that, right? It's not perfect. I do still have times where I'm stressed and anxious, and I might even have like the occasional thinking about war stuff, right? But nowhere near before. And now, even if I do, I know what it is. And I'm like, I can change my mind. I can change how I feel about this.
I know my patience, my ability. So, just today, there were a lot of unnecessary mistakes that were going on in my life that were things that I have a hard time with those. Because I guess I take so much attention to detail, and I want things to be done right all the time. And not everybody's on that wavelength, but I heard that Eric, I think it was Eric on a previous episode, he said, one of the things you can look at about a person, how they define themselves, is how they handle failure, and that includes other people's failure, right? And I'm a way better version of myself when I'm physically healthy, like as in like I haven't eaten, I feel terrible the next day after I eat 2 cases of Oreos, or drink too much or whatever it may be. There's multiple types of hangovers in my life. Don't like them. And then the other thing is rest. Like if I'm fatigued, that's usually how I know that I need to rest, is because my patience isn't where it needs to be a great leader.
Right. And that in and of itself, that's stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the Stoics were talking about, right? Because here's the thing.
But I don't need medicine to sleep. I need to make a choice to rest.
Right. And to actually know how to rest, right?
Yes.
That doesn't mean sitting and watching TV until you fall asleep. That's not rest. That's
right.
You got physical rest and mental rest.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what meditation does.
That's right.
But also, all of those things you described, that's what we call suffering.
Yes.
There is no cure for suffering, because there is always suffering. That is what life is about, is suffering. The only thing you can do about it is how you deal with it. That's it.
Dude, that's incredible, brother. That is absolutely incredible. So the book, Caveman to Philosopher. Truth or false, right now, especially for folks that are hanging out with us today on this podcast, you're going to be giving them a free copy?
Yeah. Anybody that wants a copy of the book can just email me at hermitradio@gmail.com. Just send me a message with some information. We'll talk, and we'll get you a copy.
That's incredible, and we're gonna have a bunch of copies here at the office too. So anybody in the Nashville area, if you want to swing by and snag it, we'll have them for you up front. And we also have a mailbox too, so we can also put some in the mail. We'd be happy to do that. So, dude, that's incredible. Thank you so much for doing that for everybody. It's a great book. It's a great read. And honestly, man, I'm excited for the second one, because when I was done with it, I felt like I wanted more. You know what I mean? That's the only downfall to a short book.
That's right.
But it was a more of not feeling incomplete. It was like I was craving more,
Yeah.
Which was awesome. So Caveman to Philosopher by Cameron Harman, and hermitradio@gmail.com. Shoot them an email, and that's how you can get you a copy free of charge. That's incredible. Free of charge, man. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. And then obviously your podcast, which it's streaming pretty much everywhere, right?
That's right.
Anywhere you can stream it, and that's the Hermit Radio podcast. It's also on hermitcast.com.
Yes, absolutely.
Your Instagram is Cameron_Harmon91. And what else? What else have I forgot as far as where folks need to go find you at? So I know Hermit Radio has an IG too.
That's right.
We just tagged it a minute ago. Let me look that sucker up and make sure I know what it is, because there's some really good stuff on here. It's Hermit_Radio on Instagram.
That's right.
Hermit_Radio. That's fantastic. Fantastic. Well, dude, is there anything else that you want to leave everybody with today?
Yes, I would like to leave everybody with something that I feel like is profoundly calming and insightful, and that is Ram Dass said it best, and he said, "We're all just walking each other home," and that's what you're doing every day, right? No matter what we're talking about, whatever we're doing, we are in this together, and the sooner that we get back to remembering that, the easier things are going to be, and the more likely it is that we will have that future where we are doing things positively, and the good news is coming.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Well, folks, today in the building, as I mentioned before, we had author, founder, veteran, student, husband, father, Cameron Harman in the building. It was... I know I learned a lot. One of the coolest things about my little hot sheets here is I take notes while we talk. brother, I got more so good information on these things. I've kept them all because I'm like, holy crap, these are like great notes for a lot of different things, right? So really cool. Cameron Harman with Hermit Radio, author of Caveman to Philosopher. Thanks so much for hanging with me today, brother. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. It was you've been on our list of top guests to get in here since we started it. Glad to get you in here today. And folks, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of The Hit Streak. I am your man, Nick Hyder, and as we learned today, live in the present. It's a great time to experience, and you don't want to miss it, right? So thanks for hanging with us another time today. Hit that subscribe button to keep tuning in. God bless.